The first time they came begging, it was still dark enough that the yard light made their breath look like smoke. A pickup rolled in slow, tires crunching the gravel like it was afraid of waking the whole county. Then another. Then another. Headlights cutting through the bare corn stubble, bouncing off the frost, finding my barn, my chicken coop, my windmill, and finally the two shapes hitched under the shed roof, June and Moses, standing patient as church deacons, steam lifting from their flanks. I knew the first man out of the first truck. Everybody did. Dale Rourke. In high school, he'd been the kind of guy who could lean back in a chair and make it look like a favor he was doing gravity. In the 80s, he'd become the kind of farmer who could roll into town on a shiny John Deere and make the whole diner turn to watch. Dale didn't walk up to your table. He arrived at it, and when he arrived at mine that morning, his boots sank an inch into my frozen yard, and he looked like a man who'd swallowed something sharp. "Cal," he said, like we were old friends, like he hadn't laughed at me for years. Behind him, his brother-in-law, a co-op manager, and two men I recognized from the bank's foreclosure notices stood with their hands tucked under their armpits, shoulders up, faces tight. One of them carried a cardboard box like it weighed more than it should. "What is it?" my wife Marion asked from the porch behind me. She'd pulled my jacket over her nightgown, hair up in a messy knot, eyes still waking but already suspicious. Dale's gaze slid past me toward the barn, toward the mules, then back to my face. He didn't smirk. That was the first thing that made my stomach go cold. Dale's smirk had been a permanent fixture since 1983. "You got food," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, like hoarding was a sin, and he'd come to confess it out of me. I could hear the highway, distant and restless. Even out here you could feel the town's panic. The radio had been talking about it for 3 days. Fighting overseas, ships stalled, refineries down for maintenance, the governor asking folks to remain calm. Calm didn't keep a truck running. Calm didn't put diesel in a combine. In town, the gas station had a handwritten sign that read, "Limit 10 gallons." Then a second sign taped over it that read, "No gas." Then a third that read, "No fighting or police will be called." At the grocery, the bread aisle was bare by noon. At the co-op, they were locking the fuel pumps with chains like it was a bank vault. And now the same men who'd spent half a decade calling me backwards were standing in my yard at dawn like pilgrims at a shrine. "You got grain," Dale went on. "You got eggs. You got potatoes in that cellar. Everyone knows you do. Everyone knows you always do." That last part came out with an edge, like my preparedness was personal, like I'd insulted him by not being surprised. Marion's hand tightened on my shoulder from behind. I could feel her pulse through her fingers. She'd been hearing the phone ring all day yesterday. Neighbors checking in, old friends asking how we were. The same voices that used to laugh at the idea of a man plowing behind mules. Now they spoke soft, the way people talk when they want something. I looked at Dale's truck. In the bed, under a tarp, were empty 5-gallon cans, more than a dozen. "Food," I repeated, tasting the word. "For what?" Dale's jaw jumped. "For our families, for town, for—" He turned like he'd only just noticed the men behind him, as if their presence proved the point. "For everybody." The man with the box stepped forward, cleared his throat. He wasn't a farmer. He was a banker in a heavy coat that still smelled faintly of office heat and carpet cleaner. Mr. Satterfield. I recognized his face because it had stared out at me from behind a desk twice a month for years, always with that same look. Polite concern stretched over hard math. He held the box out like an offering. "Mr. Mercer," he said, voice clipped and practiced. "I'm not here in any official capacity. We're all just citizens this morning, concerned, trying to help the community." He opened the box. Inside were envelopes, white, thick. He pulled one out and showed me the name on it like I couldn't read my own. "Mercer, Caleb. We're prepared to discuss arrangements," he said. "Payment, fair market." Immediate. Marion let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. Fair market, she echoed. That's what you called it when you tried to take our land in '85. Satterfield's smile twitched. We've all had difficult years. Dale's eyes flicked to Marion, then away. He didn't like being reminded of history, especially the parts where he'd been loud and wrong. I stared at the envelope, then at June and Moses, then at the men who'd come to buy my food like it was an asset on a spreadsheet. And suddenly I wasn't in my yard in 1989 with a cold wind knifing through my sleeves. I was back in 1982, in the spring mud, with my boots sinking and my pride taking on water, and the whole county laughing like a chorus. Because it hadn't started with an oil crisis. It had started with a pair of mules and a rumor that I'd lost my mind. In the spring of 1982, I was 27, newly married, and freshly in possession of 65 acres of ground my father had worked until it bent his back and tightened his hands into claws. Dad died in January. Heart attack in the barn, hay hook still in his fist. I found him face down in the straw, like he'd simply knelt and decided to rest. The doctor said it was quick, merciful. Marion said merciful didn't feel like the right word when your father's coffee cup was still warm on the kitchen table. After the funeral, when the casseroles stopped arriving and the condolences thinned, the real business began. What to do with a farm that had been run by a man who believed in debt the way he believed in rattlesnakes. Real, dangerous, and best kept at a distance. Everybody in town had advice. Sell the mules, the co-op manager told me, grinning like he was joking but not really. Get yourself a real tractor. Take a loan while rates are still decent, Satterfield said at the bank, sliding papers across his desk like he was dealing cards. New equipment, higher yields, it's the modern way. Plant fence row to fence row, Dale Rourke said at the diner, loud enough that the whole place could hear. If you're gonna farm, farm. Don't play Little House on the Prairie. And I tried. God help me. I tried to be the kind of farmer the '80s wanted. I walked into the John Deere dealership once, just to see. The salesman wore a belt buckle the size of a hubcap and called me Buddy before I'd even said my name. He took me outside and patted the hood of a tractor like it was a prize bull. 4-wheel drive, he said reverently. Air-conditioned cab. Satellite ready. You can run this baby all day and not spill your coffee. I put my hand on the green paint. It was warm from the sun and smooth as a new refrigerator. I imagined myself up there, cab sealed, radio on, heat blowing, moving across my fields without feeling the wind. It was an easy dream to slip into. Then the salesman told me the payment. My stomach did that little drop, like missing a step in the dark. He must have seen it because he smiled wider. Don't worry. Everybody finances. It's just part of it now. You borrow to grow. You grow to pay. It's simple. It wasn't simple to my father. Dad had been born in 1929, the year the ground fell out from under everybody. He didn't talk about it much, but once, when I was 12, he'd taken me to an auction where a man's entire life went for pennies on the dollar. The farmer's wife stood by the house and watched strangers load her dishes into the backs of pickups. A kid about my age cried on the porch until his father grabbed his shoulder hard enough to make him flinch. Dad leaned down to me and said, "That right there is debt with teeth." On the drive home, he told me the story of my grandfather, how he'd farmed with horses because the bank wouldn't lend him money for a tractor after 29, and how, when everyone else panicked, my grandfather still had oats for the horses and a garden behind the house and a smokehouse full of hams. Machines are fine, Dad said, but the minute you need fuel you can't control. You're not farming. You're renting your own life. I'd rolled my eyes then, a kid eager for shiny things. Now, standing by that green tractor with a salesman waiting for my signature, my father's voice came back like a hand on my shoulder. I didn't buy it. I went home, walked into the barn, and looked at the empty stalls where my father's horses used to stand before he'd switched to mules because a mule's got more sense than a horse and less pride than a man. June and Moses had been Dad's last stubborn purchase. a matched team he'd found from an old-timer in Missouri who was getting too arthritic to hitch. Dad had used them mostly for odd jobs, pulling logs, dragging a harrow through the garden, hauling hay wagons when the tractor was down. The county had laughed at him too, but Dad didn't care what the county thought. He cared what the land did. After he died, the mules became mine. Marion watched me stand there that day, hand on June's neck, feeling the heat under her shaggy winter coat. "You're thinking about it," she said softly. I didn't answer because saying it out loud would make it real, and real things could be judged. "You don't have to prove anything," Marion said. "Not to them." "That's not it," I lied. But it was. Part of it. The part that had been 27 and tired of being the quiet kid in a county full of loud men. The part that wanted to walk into the diner and have Dale Rourke shut his mouth for once. Still, when spring came and the ground dried enough to work, I hitched June and Moses to the plow. The first furrow we cut was crooked. My hands weren't my father's. My shoulders weren't used to the steady pull, the way a mule leans into the harness like it's becoming part of the earth. Sweat slid down my back, even though the air was cold. Marion brought me water in a mason jar and sat on the fence to watch, her face unreadable. By noon, a truck pulled up along the road and slowed. Dale Rourke leaned out the window, cap low, sunglasses reflecting my field. He watched me step beside the mules, heard the creak of leather, saw the plow slice into the soil like a knife. Then he laughed. Not a quiet laugh, not a private one. He leaned on his horn, long and loud, like he was calling the whole county to witness. Then he shouted, "Hey, Mercer, you plowing for the Smithsonian?" His buddies in the cab howled. The truck rolled on, leaving a trail of dust and ridicule. By sundown, the story had gotten ahead of me. In the diner, they were already telling it like a joke. How Caleb Mercer lost his mind when his daddy died. How he decided to turn his farm into a museum. How Marion must be regretting her vows. The next Sunday at church, a man slapped my back and said, "Caleb, I hear you got yourself a tractor with 4 legs." People smiled. People meant well. People didn't understand that mockery, even wrapped in friendliness, still hit. I could have quit then, sold the mules, signed the papers, bought a tractor and blended in. Instead, I went back out Monday and hitched them again. The thing about mules is they don't care if somebody laughs. They care if you're fair. If you jerk the reins to show off, they'll make you regret it. If you rush them, they'll slow down. If you treat them like partners, they'll pull until your arms shake and your lungs burn and the sun goes down and you realize you've done more with 2 animals and stubbornness than you ever did with pride. I learned their language. Moses liked to test you. June liked to work. Moses would stop in the middle of a row just to see if I'd lose my temper. June would lean into the collar harder if she heard my voice calm. They taught me patience the way the land teaches you humility. Slowly, repeatedly, whether you want it or not. And while the county laughed, my field got planted. Not as fast as Dale's, not as wide, but planted. Marion and I didn't just farm row crops. That was another thing the 80s didn't respect. Everyone wanted one big cash crop, one big check, one big machine to match the neighbors. My father had done it different. He'd kept a garden bigger than some folks' whole fields. He'd raised chickens and hogs and a handful of beef. He'd cut hay in the low ground and planted oats on the hill to feed the horses, even after he no longer needed them. Diversity, he'd called it, like it was insurance. So I did it too. We planted corn, yes, because corn was king, and the co-op made you feel like a traitor if you didn't. But we also planted beans, oats, a patch of potatoes, a strip of alfalfa. Marion canned. Marion baked bread. Marion kept a notebook where she wrote down what we had and what we needed like she was managing a store. People teased her too. "Mercer's wife is turning into a pioneer," they'd say when she bought extra jars at the hardware store. She'd smile and say, "Better a pioneer than a beggar." I loved her for that, and feared for it, because bold women in our county got labeled the same way stubborn men did. Trouble. Trouble came in the form of Mr. Satterfield in 1983, when he invited me into his office with the same calm tone a preacher uses before a sermon. He slid my file across the desk. My father's signatures were still on half the papers. Dad had kept one small note on the land, not because he liked debt, but because a drought in '79 had forced his hand. We'd been paying it faithfully. Satterfield tapped the paper. "Interest rates are rising," he said. "You might want to refinance now, lock something in, free up capital." "I'm fine," I said. He smiled like he'd expected that. "Caleb, you're young. You have an opportunity your father didn't. Modern farming is capital intensive. If you don't scale, you'll get left behind." Left behind by what? By progress. Progress. He said it like it was a train you either got on or got flattened by. He leaned forward. "Look, you can keep doing what you're doing, horses and canning jars. But let's be honest, you won't compete. Your yields will be lower, your margins thinner. You'll struggle. And struggling tends to create problems." Problems like what? Satterfield's eyes didn't blink. Problems like missed payments. There it was. The teeth. I left the bank with my jaw tight and my stomach hot. That afternoon, I hitched the mules and worked until my hands blistered. Anger can be fuel if you aim it right. The next few years were a blur of seasons and small humiliations. The county fair where Dale's new combine won a ribbon and my mules got a few polite nods. The church potlucks where men talked about horsepower and I talked about rainfall. My son Luke was born in 1984. He came out loud, red-faced and hungry, as if he already understood the world demanded effort. My daughter Beth followed in 1986, quiet-eyed and watchful, like Marion. Raising kids on a farm is like raising them inside a moving machine. There's always something shifting, some gear you can't stop. A storm, a broken fence, a sick calf, a bill. Through it all, the mules kept pulling and the county kept laughing, but the laughter changed in tone after 1985. That was the year the auction started. You could feel it in the air before it showed up in the newspaper. Men stopped buying new trucks. The diner got quieter. The co-op manager stopped slapping backs and started staring at his coffee like it held answers. Interest rates climbed like a fever. The same bankers who'd been pushing loans now spoke in softer voices. Tightening, they called it. Just temporarily. But farms don't run on temporarily. One Thursday in July, Marion and I drove into town for feed and saw a crowd gathered outside the courthouse. A poster was taped to the door. Farm sale, equipment, livestock, household goods. It was the Jansens' place. Old Mr. Jansen had farmed across from us since before I was born. He'd once given me a ride on a hay wagon and told me, "A farm isn't a business, it's a promise. That's why it breaks your heart." Now his promise was being sold off in public like it was nothing. We stood at the edge of the crowd and watched strangers bid on his machinery. People who'd never set foot in his fields. People who didn't know the names of his cows. Mr. Jansen stood by the fence, hat in hand, face gray. His wife sat in the truck, eyes fixed straight ahead, as if looking at the auction would make it more real. Dale Rourke was there too, leaning against his pickup with an almost bored expression. He nudged a buddy and said something that made them snicker. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. When Mr. Jansen's old tractor went for less than half what it was worth, I felt something in my chest tighten. I walked over to Dale before I could talk myself out of it. "What's funny?" I asked. Dale turned, surprise flickering across his face like he hadn't expected the mule guy to have a spine. He grinned. "Nothing, Cal. Just hard to watch, you know." "Hard to watch?" My voice came out sharper than I meant. "You're smiling." Dale's grin hardened. "You want to know what's hard? Working your whole life and still being behind. That's hard. But hey, not you, right? You're over there playing pioneer with your mules. Must be nice not to have real expenses." "I have expenses." "Sure," Dale said, condescending. "But you're not trying to grow. You're not trying to win." Win. Like farming was a game, and the prize was being the last man standing. He leaned in, voice lower. "You know what, Cal? Keep your mules, keep your little garden. When this blows over, and it will, you'll still be the guy in the slow lane. Meanwhile, the rest of us are building something." "Building what?" I asked. Dale shrugged. "The future." He turned away. Conversation over. Like I was an outdated tool. That night, Marion found me in the barn sitting on a bale of hay, head in my hands. "You can't fight the whole county," she said softly. "I'm not trying to fight," I said. "What are you trying to do?" I looked up at June and Moses, their silhouettes steady in the dim light. "I'm trying to keep us from being next," I said. Marion's face softened. She crossed the barn and sat beside me. "Then we keep doing what we're doing," she said. "We keep our promise." In 1986, Satterfield called again. This time his tone was less smug and more urgent. "Caleb," he said, "it would be wise to consider restructuring. The bank is reviewing all agricultural portfolios." "Portfolios," I repeated, disgusted. "It's not personal," he said quickly, like he'd sensed my anger. "It's policy. Look, if you refinance, consolidate your note, maybe expand a little." "No," I said. Silence. Then Satterfield sighed, and for a moment, his banker mask slipped. He sounded tired. "You're making it difficult for me to help you," he said. "I didn't ask for help." "You will," he said, and the teeth showed again. "Everybody does, eventually." He hung up. That winter, the co-op announced fuel price increases. The feed mill started requiring partial payment up front. The hardware store stopped letting folks run tabs. Small changes, like a fever rising 1 degree at a time. And through it all, June and Moses ate hay and oats, the same as always. Their fuel grew in my field. I started stocking more than Marion thought necessary, not because I was paranoid, but because I'd seen what happened when systems got strained. People didn't become monsters. They became desperate, and desperation made good people do ugly things. Marion didn't argue. She'd seen the auctions too. We built a bigger root cellar. We put up shelves in the basement. We bought extra salt. We learned how to cure meat the way my father had, smoke curling out of the little shed behind the house like a quiet prayer. Luke grew into a wiry boy with my stubborn chin and Marion's steady gaze. By the time he was 5, he could carry a bucket of feed without spilling and could tell June from Moses by the way their ears angled when you spoke. Beth followed him everywhere like a shadow with braids. In 1988, Dale Rourke bought a second combine. He threw a party about it. No kidding. He invited half the county out to his place, set up coolers of beer, grilled steaks, parked the new machine in the yard like a trophy. Men stood around it, hands on hips, talking about yield monitors and horsepower. Dale's wife wore a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't go. Marion wanted to, just to be polite, but I couldn't stand the idea of watching a man celebrate debt like it was victory. Luke asked why. "Because I'm busy," I said. He frowned. "Busy with what?" I looked at the field beyond the barn, the stubble, the wind bending the grass, the mules chewing hay like they had all the time in the world. "Busy keeping our promises," I said. That was the year Dale started circling my land in conversation. It began harmless, like curiosity. "Hey, Cal, you ever think about selling that back 40? He'd ask at church, smiling. I'd say no. Then it got more direct. He'd mention expanding, efficiency, consolidation. He'd say, "It's the way things are going." One evening he showed up in my driveway unannounced, leaned against his truck like he owned the gravel. "You could make good money," he said, nodding toward my field. "You're sitting on prime ground." "I'm not sitting," I said. "I'm farming." Dale chuckled. "With mules. They work." "That's not the point," he said, impatience slipping through. "The point is, the world is changing. You're either part of it or you get swallowed." "By who?" I asked, though I already knew. Dale's smile thinned. "By whoever's willing." I stared at him for a long moment, then glanced past his shoulder to the road. Far down, a car drove by, slow. Another. Something about their pace made my skin prickle. "You hear about the fuel lines in Wichita?" Dale asked suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. "Folks waiting hours." "It'll pass," I said, repeating his own old words back at him. Dale shrugged like he didn't care, but his eyes darted again toward the barn. He left without another word. That night, Marion and I listened to the radio while the kids slept. A calm voice talked about international instability. Another voice argued about strategic reserves. Then a local update. The co-op would be limiting fuel purchases to essential operations. People were urged not to hoard. Marion looked at me. "You think it's serious?" she asked. I thought about my father's voice, about debt with teeth, about machines that needed fuel you couldn't grow, about a county that had replaced resilience with speed. "I think," I said carefully, "we're about to find out what all that laughing was worth." The next morning I drove into town early, just for nails and coffee, and saw the first fight at the gas station. 2 men, both farmers I knew, yelling with faces red, one grabbing the other's collar because somebody thought somebody else cut the line. A woman screamed. A kid cried. The station owner waved his arms like a man trying to stop a flood with his hands. I bought my nails and coffee and came straight home. By noon, the phone started ringing. "Cal, you got any extra diesel?" a neighbor asked, voice too casual. "No," I said truthfully. I had a small tank for the pickup and the old tractor I kept mostly for moving bales, but it wasn't extra. "Oh," he said, disappointment heavy. "Well, you got food, right? You always got food." "We got what we need," I said. There was a pause, then a laugh that sounded forced. "Yeah, of course, just checking in." Click. The second call was from the co-op manager. "Caleb," he said, "all business. We're taking inventory on local supplies, in case of, emergencies." "You mean shortages?" I said. He cleared his throat. "Sure. Look, we might need to coordinate distribution, for the good of the community." I pictured his fuel pumps locked with chains, his warehouse full of feed that he'd been selling on credit to men now drowning. "I'm not a warehouse," I said. "You've always been prepared," he said, voice sharpening. "People are talking." "People talk," I said. After I hung up, Marion stood at the sink staring out the window. "They're going to come," she said quietly. "I know." Luke and Beth were in the living room building a fort with blankets. Luke held a broom like a rifle, playing soldier. Beth giggled. Marion's voice broke on the next words. "We have kids." I stepped behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist. "We're not going to let anyone hurt them," I said. She leaned back into me. "I know you," she whispered. "You'll give everything away before you let someone starve." I didn't answer because she was right, and that scared me. Giving was easy. Protecting was harder. That afternoon, I hitched June and Moses and went to the field like it was any other day. The work steadied me. The creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves, the smell of turned earth. The world could be on fire and a mule would still pull if you asked fair. Halfway through the first pass, I heard the sound of an engine idling at the edge of the field. I looked up. Dale Rourke's truck sat there, dust settling around it. He watched me for a long moment through the windshield, then got out and walked toward me with his hands in his pockets, like he was coming to chat. June flicked an ear. Moses snorted. I stopped, wiped my brow, and waited. Dale came close enough that I could see the tiredness in his face, the way his eyes had that pinched look of a man who hadn't slept. "Cal," he said. "Dale." He glanced at the plow, at the neat cut of soil behind it, then back at me. "You still planting?" he asked, as if surprised I hadn't stopped to panic like everyone else. "Food doesn't care about headlines," I said. Dale's mouth tightened. He looked away. For the first time in my memory, he looked embarrassed. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something sharp, something to regain control, but what came out was different. You hear about the co-op? He asked. I heard they locked the pumps, I said. Dale nodded once, hard. They're rationing. The trucks from Omaha aren't coming. They say it could be weeks. Weeks. Planting waits for no man. Neither does hunger. Dale swallowed, and I saw it then. The fear under the pride. He cleared his throat. Look, I know we haven't always... He stopped, like the words tasted bad. I know I've given you hell. I didn't speak. The wind filled the silence. Dale's gaze dropped to the ground, to the fresh-turned soil. You got away, he said softly. You got away without diesel. June shifted, impatient. Moses flicked his tail. Dale lifted his eyes to me. I might need... He hesitated. We might need to talk. About what? I asked, though I already knew. Dale's jaw worked. His voice came out rough. About food, he said. And in that moment, standing in my field behind 2 mules while the man who'd mocked me for years swallowed his pride, I felt something I didn't expect. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a heavy, aching awareness that the jokes were over, and what came next would matter more than anyone's pride. Because when people get hungry, they don't just beg. Sometimes they take. And the oil crisis hadn't even truly hit yet. It was still only the first crack in the dam. Dale stood there waiting for me to make it easy on him. That was his whole life, really. Waiting for the world to make room for his pride. I rested my hands on the plow handles and watched him breathe through his nose like a bull trying not to charge. You want to talk, I said. Then talk. He glanced over his shoulder at the road, like he expected another truck to show up and witness him begging. My diesel supplier said the next delivery's canceled, he muttered. Co-op's rationing what's left, and the bank... He stopped himself, swallowed. The bank's calling in notes early. They're spooked. That landed heavier than the fuel news. A farmer can limp through a season on half a tank if he's lucky and stubborn. But a bank calling early is a noose tightening. It's not about money then. It's about control. Dale's voice dropped even more. I got corn standing. I got beans. I got... He waved a hand like the words were too much. I got everything in the field and nothing to run it. And my wife's looking at the pantry like it's a joke. The wind pushed against my cap brim. June shifted, ready to move. Moses chewed like he had all day. You want to buy food? I asked. Dale's jaw flexed. Not buy. Then he corrected himself quickly, like the distinction mattered. Trade, work it out, whatever. I studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward my mules. You see them? I asked. Dale's eyes flicked to June and Moses. Yeah. They don't run on diesel, I said, but they don't run on pride either. Dale flushed. Cal, you want my help, I said, cutting him off. You're going to say it plain. His lips parted, closed again. He looked away at the fresh furrow, at the neat slice of earth that didn't care what year it was. Finally he said it, barely above a whisper. I need help. There it was. The whole county's future hanging on 4 words. I exhaled slow, not because I wanted to savor it, but because I could already feel the weight of what it meant. If I helped Dale, I wouldn't just be helping Dale. I'd be lighting a signal fire. Here's what I can do, I said. I can plow for you with the mules. I can help you get something planted you can harvest by hand if you have to. I can trade you food for labor. But I'm not selling my winter away for a handshake and a promise. Dale's eyes sharpened. I'm not asking for charity. Good, I said, because I'm not offering it. He swallowed hard. What do you want? I leaned closer, keeping my voice low so the wind had to work to steal it. I want you to stop acting like you're doing me a favor by needing me, I said. And I want your word that if this turns ugly, if people start talking about taking what they didn't earn, you stand up and say no. Dale blinked, caught off balance. That wasn't the bargain he expected. He expected money, a price tag. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. People are scared, Cal. So am I said simply. Difference is, I don't use it as an excuse. For a second, Dale looked like he might laugh out of habit. But nothing came. He nodded once, stiff. Fine. Fine isn't your word, I said. Say it. Dale's face tightened. Then he forced the words through his teeth like swallowing gravel. I give you my word. I held his gaze until I believed he meant it at least enough to want to mean it. Go home, I said. Tell your wife to come by later with a list of what you actually need. Not what you want, what you need. Dale hesitated, then cleared his throat. Cal, why'd you do it? Back then, the mules. I looked at June's ears flicking toward me, at Moses's steady chew. Because my father taught me a farm isn't supposed to be impressive, I said. It's supposed to be alive. Dale stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, shoulders hunched, and drove off slower than he'd arrived. I watched the dust settle and felt the quiet before the storm. Because Dale was only the first. That evening, Marion laid supper out like any other night. Beans, cornbread, sliced tomatoes from the last of the cellar jars. The kids ate without knowing the world was shifting under them, Luke telling a story about a boy at school who said his dad had bought 3 whole freezers of meat because it might get bad. Beth listened wide-eyed. Bad like a tornado. Bad like no Pop-Tarts, Luke said solemnly, and Beth gasped like he'd said the world was ending. Marion didn't smile. She buttered Luke's cornbread with slow, careful strokes. When the kids finally went to bed, Marion sat at the table and folded her hands. How many calls? She asked. 3, I admitted. And Dale came out. Her eyebrows rose. Dale! I nodded. Marion leaned back, chair creaking. Then it's worse than the radio's saying. I didn't argue. Outside, the wind kept whirring the old maple by the yard. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked, then another, like they sensed movement. I checked the locks on the barn twice before I turned in. Not because I thought a lock could stop hunger, but because ritual is sometimes all you have. We were barely asleep when the first headlight swept across our bedroom wall. Marion sat up so fast the quilt slid to her waist. Cal! I was already moving. I pulled on my jeans, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped onto the porch with the cold biting my bare arms. The yard light threw a hard circle on the gravel. 3 trucks, men standing in my yard like a jury. Dale was there, along with Satterfield, the co-op manager, and a couple others I recognized from church and the feed store. One of them held that cardboard box. The same scene, only now it was happening in real time, not in my memory. I walked down the steps, Marion behind me in my jacket, hair wild, eyes sharp as nails. Dale opened his mouth first, then shut it, like he didn't know where to put his pride now that it had nowhere to stand. Satterfield stepped forward with his practiced smile. Mr. Mercer, he began. Not inside. Marion snapped before he could say another word. Whatever you're here for, you can say it where the cold can hear you too. Satterfield's smile tightened. Of course. He gestured to the box again. We came prepared to offer immediate compensation for any surplus you may have. We're trying to prevent panic. There are rumors, unpleasant rumors, about shortages. If we can organize a local distribution plan, we can keep the peace. The peace, I echoed. Yes, Satterfield said, smooth. In times like this, emotions run high. People make mistakes. Dale shifted, jaw working, eyes flicking toward the barn again. The co-op manager cleared his throat and spoke like he was reading from a memo. We're putting together a list of resources. It's just responsible. Responsible would have been not pushing men into loans they couldn't survive, Marion said, voice like a blade. The co-op manager flushed. Now isn't the time? It's exactly the time, she shot back. You all want to act like the fire appeared out of nowhere, but you've been stacking kindling for years. One of the men behind Dale, Hank Willis, a farmer with 3 kids and a bad temper, stepped forward. We ain't here to argue history. We got families. I've got a family too, I said. Hank's gaze slid to Marion, then back. Then you understand. Understanding wasn't the same as surrendering. Satterfield opened one of the envelopes, pulled out a sheet of paper. We can offer fair market for grain and preserved goods, he said. Cash, tonight. We can also discuss purchasing options on your back acreage. Liquidity is valuable right now. There it was. Not just food, land. Even now, in a crisis, the bank sniffed opportunity like a hog at a trough. I didn't take the paper. I didn't even look at the number. You're not buying my land, I said calmly. Satterfield's smile didn't move. Mr. Mercer, no one wants to force anything. But we have to be realistic. If the situation continues, Marion repeated, mocking. Satterfield ignored her. If the situation continues, the county may need to consider emergency measures, rationing, centralized distribution. It would be a shame if things became complicated. The word hung there, oily. My chest tightened. You threatening me, Satterfield? He lifted his hands, innocent. I'm warning you about what fear does to communities. I looked at Dale. He wouldn't meet my eyes. So I looked back at Satterfield. I'm going to tell you something plain, I said. This farm is not a storehouse for the county. I have what my family needs because we worked for it, planned for it, and didn't borrow our comfort from anyone. I'm willing to trade labor for food. I'm willing to help neighbors who show up honest. But I'm not selling my winter to a bank. Hank's face darkened. So you're just gonna sit on it while folks starve? Marion stepped forward, shoulders squared. We're not sitting, we're living. You're welcome to earn what you need, Hank, same as we did. Hank's hands balled. Earn it? Like we can earn diesel out of thin air? I nodded toward the barn without taking my eyes off him. You can earn it with your hands, same way my father did when machines broke. Same way mine have been earning it. The men muttered, restless. Satterfield's voice cooled. Mr. Mercer, you still have an outstanding note on this property, correct? A small one. My stomach tightened. Damn it! My father's last small snake. We've been paying it, I said. Of course, Satterfield said. But in uncertain times, the bank may require... Require what? Marion demanded. Satterfield's eyes slid to her, a flicker of irritation. Additional assurances, collateral. A security interest in stored commodities is not uncommon. A lien on my grain, on my food. Marion's breath hitched. I felt something in me go cold and still. Not panic. Focus. You don't have a lien on my stored food, I said. Not yet, Satterfield corrected gently, like he was teaching a child. But it can be arranged. It would make distribution simpler. That was the trick. Turn my winter into their inventory. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay even. Get off my property. Hank's chin lifted. You can't just... I can, I said, quiet and absolute. And you will. For a heartbeat, I thought Hank might lunge. The yard felt too small, too charged. I could hear June shift inside the barn, hear Moses stamp once, an impatient warning. Then Dale finally spoke, voice rough. Leave it, he said. Hank turned on him. Dale! Dale's eyes flashed. I said leave it. It wasn't courage, it was calculation. Dale had finally understood that if this turned into a fight, there would be no winners. Not with fuel gone and winter coming. Satterfield studied Dale with faint surprise, then looked back at me. This is unfortunate, he said softly. We'll revisit this when tempers cool. Don't, I said. Satterfield's smile returned, thin as paper. Good night, Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Mercer. They walked back to their trucks, but not all the way. Hank lingered, staring at me like he wanted to carve my face into memory. Then he spat into the gravel and climbed in. As the last set of taillights disappeared, Marion exhaled shakily. That wasn't about food, she whispered. No, I said. She gripped my arm hard. They're going to try to take it. I stared into the darkness where the trucks had gone, where the road led to town and the town led to fear. I know, I said. We didn't sleep after that. Not really. I sat at the kitchen table with the radio low and the coffee high, going through numbers in my head like a prayer I didn't want to say out loud. How much corn in the crib? How many jars? How much dried beans? How many eggs a day? How long the hay would last? How long before the county decided emergency meant whatever we say it means? Marion sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her mug but not drinking. Her gaze kept flicking to the kid's bedroom door. "What do we do?" she asked finally. I looked at her, at the woman who'd carried this farm on her back as much as I had, who'd been mocked right alongside me, who'd stood on the porch tonight and faced down a banker like he was a stray dog. "We do 3 things," I said. "Which are?" "First," I said, "we pay off that note. Tomorrow." Marion blinked. "With what?" "With the cattle," I said. 2 head, maybe 3. I'd rather lose beef than lose control. Her lips pressed together, pain flashing. Those cattle were security, pride, years of careful breeding. Then she nodded once. "Okay." "Second," I said, "we stop being invisible." Marion frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means we decide how help happens," I said. "Not them, not Satterfield, not the co-op. If the county needs food, it comes through work and agreement and fairness, not fear." "And the third?" I looked toward the window, toward the barn shadowed against the night. "The third," I said, "is we protect the kids." Marion's eyes shone, and she nodded again. Morning came gray and brittle. I loaded 2 steers and drove them to a processor 1 county over because I didn't trust the talk in town anymore. Men who smelled blood didn't always wait for the knife. On the way back, I saw the first sign that things had shifted from shortage to hunt. A hand-painted board nailed to the fence by the highway. "Hoarders hurt us all." Under it, in smaller letters, "Ask who has food." I kept driving, knuckles white. At the bank, Satterfield wasn't at the front counter. Of course he wasn't. He sent a young teller with shaking hands to tell me he was in a meeting. "I'm paying off my note," I said, loud enough that the lobby could hear. The teller glanced around, panicked, then whispered, "Sir, we can't accept large payments today. There's new policy." "Policy," I repeated, tasting the lie. She slid a paper toward me without meeting my eyes. It was a printed notice about temporary procedures. Marion had come with me. She leaned in and read it, then looked up. "This isn't law," she said coldly. "It's cowardice." The teller flinched. I forced my voice calm. "Get me someone who can take my payment." The teller disappeared, then returned with the branch manager, a man named Grant, who'd once asked me if I wanted to refinance like he was offering candy. Grant's smile was strained. "Caleb," he said, too friendly, "these are unusual times." "Then let me do something usual," I said. "Let me pay what I owe." Grant's eyes flicked toward a back hallway, then back. "We're consolidating accounts. It might be best to wait until next week." "Next week," Marion repeated. "So you can change the rules again?" Grant's cheeks reddened. "Mrs. Mercer." "Take the payment," I said, voice hardening, "or I'll mail it certified, file it with the county clerk, and bring my lawyer in here so fast your carpet will smoke." Grant stared at me. People in the lobby were watching now, faces tight, hunger behind their eyes. Finally, he nodded stiffly. "Fine, we'll process it." He took the check like it burned and disappeared. When he came back, he handed me a receipt with a signature that looked like it had been scratched in anger. "There," he said, voice flat. "Paid." I held the receipt like it was a shield. Marion squeezed my arm as we left. "You think that stops them?" "It stops one door," I said. "They'll try another." Outside, the bank's glass doors reflected the street. A group of men stood across from the diner, talking in a tight knot. Hank Willis was among them. Dale Rourke, too. Dale's face looked carved from stone. When Dale spotted me, he broke from the group and crossed the street. Hank called after him, but Dale ignored it. He stopped in front of me, eyes sharp. "You pay it off?" he asked. "Just did," I said. Dale's jaw tightened. "Good, because Satterfield's been saying your stored grain's basically collateral, that if folks get desperate, the county can seize it for public safety." Marion's eyes narrowed. "He said that?" Dale hesitated. "Not to you, to people." "To Hank," I said, already knowing. Dale didn't deny it. His throat bobbed. "Hank's wound tight. He thinks you're making yourself king." "I'm trying to keep my kids fed," I said. Dale's shoulders slumped a fraction. "I know. That's why." He stopped, looked away. When he looked back, there was something like shame in his eyes. "That's why I told him to back off last night." I studied Dale for a beat, then said, "You want to keep your word? You do it loud." Dale swallowed. "People don't like loud right now. Then they'll like hungry less." Marion snapped. Dale flinched at her tone, but he didn't argue. "Come by this afternoon," I told him. "You and whoever else wants to work. We'll set terms, clear, written, no guessing." Dale frowned. "Written?" "I'm done with handshakes," I said. "Handshakes don't feed children. Work does." Dale stared at me, then nodded once, slow. "Okay," he said. As he walked back toward the knot of men, Hank stepped forward like a dog straining at a chain. Dale said something to him, sharp, and Hank threw his hands up, angry. The town felt like a pot about to boil over. By the time Marion and I got home, there was a car parked on the road shoulder in front of our fence. A county cruiser. Sheriff Al Briggs leaned against it, hat low, hands in his pockets. He'd been sheriff since I was a kid. A big man with a slow voice and eyes that missed nothing. He'd hunted with my father once. He'd brought Marion a pie after Luke was born. He wasn't the kind of man to show up without a reason. I pulled into the driveway and got out. Al pushed off the cruiser and walked toward me, boots crunching. "Caleb," he said. "Sheriff." His gaze flicked to Marion, then to the barn. "Heard you had visitors last night." "Word travels," Marion said stiffly. Al sighed. "It does, and it's traveling fast." He leaned closer, voice lower. "I'm going to speak plain. There's talk at the county building about emergency management. Folks want to form a committee. Satterfield's in their ear." My stomach clenched. "He doesn't run the county." Al's mouth tightened. "In a crisis, people listen to whoever sounds confident, and bankers always sound confident." Marion folded her arms. "So what are you here for? To warn us or to serve papers?" Al's eyes softened a notch. "To warn you." He glanced down the road, then back. "Caleb, you got kids? Marion? I don't want trouble in this yard." "Neither do I," I said. Al nodded. "Then you need to understand something. Fear turns neighbors into crowds. Crowds don't think. If a rumor gets big enough, if someone says you're hoarding while babies cry, some fool's gonna decide he's doing the Lord's work by breaking your door down." Marion's face drained. Al continued, voice firm. "I can't park a deputy here 24 hours, but I can tell you this. If you make a plan, if you're seen helping in a fair way, it takes the torch out of the rumor's hand." I held his gaze. "That's what I'm trying to do." Al nodded slowly. "Good, because Hank Willis is talking like a man who wants to be a hero." "I know," I said. Al hesitated, then added, "And Caleb, keep an eye on your animals. Mules, cattle. Folks do desperate things." My throat tightened. "You think someone would—" Al didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He pushed his hat back and straightened. "I'll be at the county meeting tonight. If they start talking seizure, I'll push back. But I need you to give me something to point to, something that proves you're not just sitting on supplies." Marion's eyes flashed. "He shouldn't have to prove anything." Al's gaze stayed gentle but steady. "He shouldn't, but this isn't about what's right. It's about what keeps the pitchforks out of your yard." Al tipped his hat. then walked back to the cruiser. Before he got in, he looked back at me. "And Caleb?" "Yeah? If Satterfield offers you anything that sounds like protection," Al said, voice turning colder, "remember who benefits from you being scared." Then he drove off, tires whispering on gravel. Marion stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring after him. "They're going to turn us into the villain," she whispered. "Only if we let them write the story," I said. That afternoon, we set a table up in the barn like it was a courthouse. Marion brought out paper, a pen, the old kitchen scale. I hauled sacks of potatoes from the cellar and stacked them where people could see them. Not all of them. Not even close. But enough to make a point. We had food because we'd built it, not because we'd stolen it. Luke and Beth watched from the loft, eyes wide, like they knew something grown-up was happening but couldn't name it. At 3 o'clock, the first truck came in. Dale. He got out slowly, like each step toward my barn was a step away from the man he used to be. Behind him, his wife climbed out. Sharon Rourke, face pale, jaw set. She held a notebook tight in her hands like it was a weapon. Then another truck. Then another. Hank Willis came with 2 buddies, all of them walking stiff, eyes hard. The co-op manager showed up too, though he kept himself near the door like he wanted the option to run. Satterfield didn't come. Not yet. That was important. The banker was waiting to see if the crowd could do his work for him. I stood by the table and let the barn fill with the smell of cold denim and nervous sweat. When they were all in, Marion stepped beside me and spoke first. "This is how it's going to work," she said, voice clear. "No yelling, no threats. If you want food, you trade for it. Labor, materials, skills. We write it down so nobody lies later." Hank scoffed. "Write it down? Like we're buying a house?" "Like we're keeping things honest," Marion snapped. "Because the minute you start letting good faith run the show, the loudest liar wins." Dale's wife Sharon stepped forward, eyes on Marion. "What kind of labor?" she asked. I answered. "Plowing, planting, repairing fences, cutting wood, hauling manure, taking turns with night watch if things get ugly." Hank snorted. "Night watch? You planning a war?" "I'm planning for reality," I said. Hank stepped closer, chin out. "What if we can't work? What about folks who are old, sick?" Marion's expression softened slightly. "Then we work for them," she said. "But we decide that together, not with fists." The room went quiet for a beat, because nobody expected her to say that. They expected selfishness. They expected me to be a dragon guarding my pile. Hank shifted, thrown off, but then his face hardened again. "And how much food?" I pointed to the paper. "We start small, enough for a week. You come back and keep working, we keep trading." A murmur ran through the barn. Dale spoke, voice low. "Cal's right. We do this fair." Hank whipped his head toward Dale. "You backing him now?" Dale's face tightened, but he didn't look away. "I'm backing my kids eating," he said bluntly. "And I'm backing not having this turn into a mob." Hank's eyes flashed. "Easy for you to say. You got—" Sharon cut in, voice tight. "Hank, stop, please." Hank stared at her like she'd betrayed him, then looked back at me. "What's the catch?" he demanded. I leaned forward, palms on the table. "The catch is you stop calling it mine when it's the result of my family's work," I said quietly. "You stop pretending I owe you because you laughed at me for years, and you stop letting bankers whisper in your ear that taking from neighbors is community." Silence. Then, from the loft, Beth's small voice floated down. "Daddy?" Every head turned. Beth stood at the edge, fingers gripping the rail, her braids messy. Her eyes were huge. "Are they mad at us?" she asked. It was like someone dropped a stone into the barn. The question rippled through every adult like a shock. Hank's face changed first. The anger didn't vanish, but it cracked. His jaw worked. Dale looked down, ashamed. Sharon pressed a hand to her mouth. Marion swallowed hard and called up gently, No, baby, nobody's mad at you. Beth's lip trembled. Are we going to be hungry? My throat tightened. I forced my voice steady. No, I called up. Not if we stay smart and kind. Beth nodded like she accepted that, then vanished back into the loft. The barn stayed quiet for a long moment after that, like everyone had been reminded what hunger really meant. Then Dale stepped forward, took the pen, and signed the paper Marion slid toward him. I'll work, he said. Sharon's shoulders sagged with relief. She handed Marion her notebook. This is what we have left, she said. We can trade eggs when our hens start laying again. We can trade... Her voice caught. We can trade anything. Marion nodded. We'll make it work. One by one, others came forward. Not all gladly. Hank signed like he was signing away his pride. But he signed. When it was done, I looked at the men who'd mocked me, who'd built their lives on debt and horsepower, now agreeing to trade sweat for potatoes. It wasn't victory. It was survival. And survival has a way of changing people if it doesn't break them first. They hauled out their first week's trade that day, sacks of potatoes, jars of beans, a basket of eggs, a slab of smoked ham Marion had cut with trembling hands. Not charity, exchange. As they loaded their trucks, Dale lingered. He watched June and Moses in the stall, then looked at me. You know what they're saying in town? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. Dale's mouth tightened. They're saying you planned this. My chest went cold. Planned what? This, he said, gesturing at the yard, the barn, the people leaving with food. They're saying you knew the crisis was coming, that you stocked up to make everybody kneel. For a second, I saw my father's face, heard his voice. Debt with teeth. Then I looked at Dale, and I understood something ugly. Satterfield didn't need to seize my food with law if he could seize it with narrative. Turn me into the villain, then let fear justify theft. Who's saying it? I asked. Dale hesitated. Hank's buddies, some folks at the diner, and Satterfield doesn't correct it. Of course he didn't. I nodded slowly. Then we correct it. Dale frowned. How? I looked toward the road, toward town, toward the county meeting that night. By being visible, I said, and by telling the truth loud enough that the rumors choke on it. Dale stared at me, then gave a stiff nod like he was agreeing to something that scared him. I'll come, he said. When he drove off, Marion came up beside me. You're going to that meeting, she said. Yes. And if they try to take it? I looked at the barn, at the loft where my kids were, at the mules that had pulled us into this moment. Then they'll have to do it in front of everyone, I said, not in the dark. That night the county building was packed, not with officials, with people, farmers, wives, teenagers, old men in caps, mothers with babies on hips, the kind of crowd that makes the air feel thin because you can sense how quickly it could tilt. A table was set at the front with a microphone like they were about to hold a talent show. The county commissioner stood up and tried to smile. Folks, he said, we're here to discuss community coordination in response to the fuel disruption. A man shouted, just say it! There ain't any gas! Another yelled, my kids haven't had milk in 2 days! The commissioner raised his hands. We're working on solutions! Satterfield sat in the front row, legs crossed, face calm, like he was enjoying a sermon. Sheriff Al Briggs stood near the wall, arms folded, eyes scanning. I felt Marion's hand on my back as we pushed through the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers started immediately. That's him. That's Mercer. He's got food. I walked steady anyway. Marion's spine was straight as a fence post. Dale and Sharon followed behind us, and that alone made people blink, because Dale Rourke didn't follow anybody. The commissioner's eyes widened when he saw me, like he hadn't expected the mule guy to show up in the center of the storm. Satterfield's gaze slid to mine, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he thinks he's already won. I realized then that the real fight wasn't going to be over potatoes. It was going to be over who the county believed deserved to survive, and Satterfield was counting on fear to make them choose wrong.